You wake in your narrow bed, just as a girl named Joan woke in her small village of Domremy, in the northeast corner of France, sometime around the year 1412. But before we follow Joan's path, the girl who would hear voices in her father's garden and lead armies, let's slip into your own story, your own medieval morning. Your eyes open to the sound of church bells ringing across the village, their deep bronze voice cutting through the grey dawn. Your mother is already moving in the adjoining room. You can hear her footsteps on the packed earth floor. The air in your small sleeping chamber is cold and thick with the smell of smoke from the banked fire downstairs. You lie still for a moment under your wool blanket, breathing in that familiar scent, smoke, damp thatch, and something sweet from the herbs your mother hung from the beams. Outside your wooden shutters, the world is just beginning to wake. A rooster crows somewhere toward the mill. You can hear the miller's boy shouting, probably trying to herd geese away from the grain stores. Your father will be rising soon too, pulling on his thick wool tunic and heading to the fields, if it's spring or if it's winter, sitting by the fire to repair tools and mend fences. But that's not your work. Your work is here, inside the cottage, where the real labour of keeping a medieval household alive unfolds in tasks so ordinary they'll never make it into the histories that scribes record in monasteries. You sit up and swing your bare feet to the cold floor. The dirt beneath your toes is packed hard from years of footsteps. Your chamber is tiny, barely wide enough for the bed, a small wooden chest where you keep your second dress, and a shelf holding a candle stub and a small clay comb. The morning light is just beginning to seep through cracks in the shutters, painting thin lines of gold across the darkness. You pull your overdress over your head, the heavy woolen garment you slept in, and fasten the laces. Your underdress stays on. Most girls your age never remove both layers. The dresses exist in constant, slightly scratchy contact with your skin. You don't mind. You've known nothing else. Your feet find your soft leather shoes, the ones your father cobbled together last winter. They're worn now, the soles thin, but they're still better than going barefoot when the ground is cold or muddy. You pick up your linen head covering and wind it carefully around your hair, tucking the loose ends under with practiced fingers. This covering isn't just a fashion. It marks you as a respectable girl, modestly covering your hair as the church says a woman should. Besides, today you'll be working with wool that needs carding before it gets spun, and loose hair tangles terribly in the fibres. Downstairs you find your mother already at work. The fire has been revived from the banked coals, and she's setting a shallow pan of water to warm. Your younger brother sits in the corner, still sleepy, gnawing on a piece of bread left over from yesterday. The cottage is one long room with a stone fireplace at one end and a ladder leading to the sleeping loft where your parents sleep. It's not much, maybe 20 feet across at its widest, but it's warm in winter and it keeps the rain out, which is more than some families can say. Come, your mother says without looking up from her work. We've much to do before midday. The neighbours will be bringing their fleeces to card and we need to prepare the wheels. You nod and move to the shelf where the spinning wheels are stored. There are two of them. One for your mother, one that you've been learning on for the past year. The wood is smooth and darkened from years of hands and oils. You pull yours closer to the fire where you'll have good light and check the spindle. The last thread you were spinning yesterday is still there, waiting to be finished. Your mother hands you a wooden bowl containing yesterday's pottage, reheated. It's thin, mostly barley and water with some dried herbs from last summer and bits of turnip. But it's warm and fills your belly. You eat standing up, watching your mother work. She's already begun the endless task of preparing the household. The bread needs to be checked. There's a loaf sitting on the hearthstone covered with cloth, which will need to go to the communal oven once it's risen. The herbs hanging from the roof are being sorted. She's collecting the dried yarrow, which has some use for healing when someone comes with a cut or a fever. Your father will need fresh water from the well before he heads to the fields. Go, your mother says, making a small gesture with her hand. Fetch water, 3 buckets, and check the garden plot. See if the spring greens are ready. We'll need them tonight. This is your world as it is, in the 1400s, in a small village in medieval Europe. Not the grand world of queens and knights that the travelling singers sing about. Not the holy world of the monastery with its bells and Latin prayers, though you've heard that too when you go to the village church on feast days. This is the small, immediate world of survival and work, of spinning and cooking and keeping a household running. It's a world that will shape every day of your life, whether you marry a local boy and stay here forever, or whether, as happened to some girls you've heard about, your family arranges a betrothal to a man from the next village over, and you find yourself in a new cottage doing the same work with different hands. You grab the wooden buckets, 2 large ones and 1 smaller, and head out into the morning air. The village is beginning to move now. Chickens are being let out of their cages. You hear the blacksmith's hammer starting up in the distance, that regular ring-ring that never stops from dawn until the light fades. The well is at the centre of the village, near the church and the manor house. It's a walk of a few minutes from your cottage down the rutted lane that everyone calls simply the road, though it's barely wide enough for a cart. The morning is cool but not cold. It's spring, somewhere between March and May, when the worst of the winter chill has fled, but the air still carries a memory of frost. The fields on either side of the lane are beginning to green. You know the rhythm of this landscape the way you know the grain of your mother's wooden spoon. This is the 3rd week of March, probably, judging by how the wheat is sprouting. The rye is already a finger high. Your father walked the boundaries of your family's strips yesterday, checking on them, planning the planting ahead. As you walk, you pass Goodwife Emma's cottage. She's standing at her door with her infant son on her hip, watching the world wake. She waves, and you wave back. Emma had that baby last summer, and from what you've heard, the midwife old Marjorie said the birth was easier than some. Old Marjorie is a woman in her 60s. Everyone agrees she's good at her work. She's attended births in the village for so long that people say she can tell before the baby comes whether it will be a boy or a girl, though you're not sure you believe that. You've heard that childbirth is terrifying, that women sometimes die from it, that it's the most painful thing a woman experiences, but you've also noticed that Emma seems happy enough now, nursing her boy and planning to conceive again soon. Her husband would like a larger family. That's what drives marriage. The practical need for hands and the continuation of the family line. At the well, you find yourself not alone. Agnes, who lives 3 cottages from yours and is about your age, is there with her younger sister. Agnes is drawing water into a single bucket. She's smaller than you, with a round face that reddens easily, and she's already showing signs of the rounded figure her mother has. The sort of build that the village men apparently favour, though you can't imagine why it would matter. "Good morning," Agnes says brightly. "My mother sent me early before the rush. After the baker fires his oven at midday, everyone comes running with their pans and pots. The water line gets long." You help her haul the bucket up. It's heavy when full, perhaps 30 pounds of water, and it takes the strength of both of you pulling on the rope. The rope is worn smooth from thousands of hands, all the women and girls of the village drawing water for years and years. Somewhere, a historian in a faraway future will write about medieval women, and they might mention water drawing in passing, a sentence or two, but you know it consumes hours of your life. Every day, multiple times, you haul this rope. In winter, when ice forms on top, it's harder still. "Have you heard," Agnes asks, her eyes bright with gossip, "about Thomas the Fletcher's daughter?" You know exactly who she means. Margaret, who is 16 and has just been betrothed to a man from the next village over. A man named William, who works land for the lord there. The betrothal was arranged by their fathers, as is proper. Margaret will be married in about a year once she's older and the negotiations are finalised. You've heard she's not happy about it. William apparently has a reputation for being quarrelsome, and Margaret was spotted crying in the church last week. What about her, you ask, though you do want to know. Marriage betrothals are serious business, and they're also endlessly fascinating to everyone in the village. When a girl gets betrothed, her entire future shifts. She'll move to a new cottage, work for a different mother-in-law, bear children in a place where she might not have any friends. My mother heard from Goodwife Kate, who heard from the blacksmith's wife, that William has a girl in his village already, that he's not planning to wait for Margaret, that there might be a need for... Agnes pauses meaningfully and looks around to make sure no one else is listening. A quick wedding rather than waiting a year. This means Margaret might be getting married much sooner than expected, possibly because William has gotten some girl pregnant and wants to salvage his reputation by marrying immediately. You feel a small flutter of sympathy for Margaret. You're only about a year younger than her, and the thought of being married off, especially under such circumstances, is both thrilling and terrifying. You fill your buckets, the 2 large ones heavy with water, the smaller one also full, and Agnes helps you settle them. You can carry one large bucket on your hip, balanced against your side, and hold the smaller one in the same hand. The other large bucket you'll have to set down and drag or carry awkwardly. It's the work of a girl, and it's never easy. "Better go," Agnes says cheerfully, "before my sister drinks all the well dry." You head back toward home, your bucket sloshing slightly with each step. By the time you return home, Your mother has the carding equipment spread out on a clean cloth near the fire. Carding is the process of combing out the raw fleece so the fibres lie in the same direction, ready to be spun into thread. It's done with 2 flat wooden paddles, each about the size of your hand, covered with fine wire teeth. The work is repetitive and honestly, your hands begin to ache after a while, but it's necessary work that pays. Your mother has an arrangement with several village families to card their wool in exchange for grain or cheese at harvest time. The first fleece of the morning is from the Lord's domain, the land the Lord keeps for himself, where he raises sheep. A man brought it yesterday, still slightly stained and matted from the animal's body. Your mother has already begun the initial cleaning, washing some of the worst of the dirt and grease out in the stream, and then drying it by the fire. Now comes the carding. You sit across from your mother, taking one of the paddles and a handful of the cleaned fleece. The wire teeth catch the wool, and you brush the fibres in one direction, then pass the paddle to your mother, who brushes in the other direction, the teeth interlocking, gradually aligning all the fibres the same way. It's a rhythm you could do in your sleep by now. Brush, pass, receive, brush, pass, receive. Your hands fall into the motion without your mind needing to guide them. Your aunt is coming to the house next month, your mother says, continuing a conversation she apparently began while you were at the well. She does this sometimes, talking about something in the past tense as though you were there. She's pregnant again, and she wants my mother to attend the birth. Your grandmother has delivered half the babies born in the upper village for 40 years. Your aunt trusts her. Childbirth is a women's business. Midwives, older women, female relatives, they attend births, not men. Even physicians, if a wealthy family could afford one, would rarely be present for the actual delivery. You've heard the pain is extraordinary, but you've also heard stories of women who seem to recover well enough, at least those who don't develop fever or other complications. Your mother had 3 children. You, your brother who died as an infant from a wasting sickness, and your younger brother, and she survived all 3 deliveries, though you remember her being ill for weeks after the last one. Will grandmother go? You ask, passing the carded fleece to your mother to brush again. She will. Your aunt's husband has a good holding and he'll pay for her knowledge. Besides, your aunt is a good woman and grandmother likes her. Your mother pauses and brushes the wool more carefully. When you marry, if God grants you children, you'll need these skills. You'll need to know how to manage the pain, what herbs help, when to call for help instead of suffering alone. Women teach women these things, daughter. No man can understand what we endure. This is one of the rare moments when your mother speaks directly about the adult world you're approaching. Marriage and children are inevitable, assuming you live long enough. A girl typically marries somewhere between 15 and 20, depending on when a suitable match presents itself and when her family can arrange the betrothal and gather a dowry. The dowry is crucial. It's the price of marriage, the money or goods or land your family will give to your husband's family to compensate them for taking you on. Your family isn't wealthy, so your dowry will be modest. Perhaps your mother is saving coins, or perhaps your father is planning to give some of his harvest. You've heard stories of girls whose families were so poor that their dowries consisted of nothing more than a set of sheets and a copper pot. The work continues through the morning and into the afternoon. By midday you pause for a meal, bread, cheese and a cup of weak ale. Your mother has also made a pottage thickened with barley and flavoured with dried herbs. You eat and rest for perhaps 30 minutes, then resume carding. Your fingers are stained slightly grey from the fleece oils. By this evening, when you wash, the stains will still be visible, but they'll fade by tomorrow. Around mid-afternoon, a neighbour comes with more fleece to card. Then another. Your mother is known for doing careful work and people trust her. She negotiates with each person, what she'll charge when it will be finished. You're quiet during these negotiations. You're learning, watching how your mother speaks, how she handles the business of her labour. As the light begins to fade, the last of the neighbours leaves. Your mother counts out the payment, a measure of grain that will feed your family for a week, and a small round of cheese, fresh made yesterday. Good work, worth the effort. Your hands ache, your back is slightly sore from bending over, and your eyes feel tired from the close work, but there's a satisfaction in seeing the carded wool stacked in neat rolls, ready to be spun. Tomorrow you'll spin, your mother says. Your wheel needs work, we'll prepare it after supper. You've been learning to spin for the past year, and you're still not very good. Your thread is sometimes too thick, sometimes too thin, and occasionally it breaks and you have to tie it back together with a knot that the experienced spinners can spot immediately. but you practice, because spinning is women's work, essential work, and mastery of it will be expected of you whether you stay here in your village or marry and move elsewhere. The spinning wheel sits in the corner, and your mother brings it closer to the fire for tomorrow's light. It's a simple machine, really. A wooden wheel about 3 feet in diameter, a spindle to wind thread onto, a treadle to work with your foot, and a flyer that guides the thread. Your mother's wheel, by contrast, is an intricate piece of work that her own mother made years ago, decorated with carved patterns and fitted with a wheel that spins so smoothly that spinning becomes almost meditative. Your father comes home as the light is truly beginning to fade, bringing with him the smell of earth and sweat. He's been in the fields all day, preparing the strips of land that belong to him. He has about 3 acres scattered in different parts of the village's land, which is the typical arrangement. Strips divided among the families, so everyone has some good land and some poorer land. It keeps things relatively fair, though of course wealthy families can buy or lease additional strips. Your mother has been stirring a pot over the fire, and now she serves supper, a thick pottage made with peas and barley, flavoured with herbs, with onions and a few pieces of what might be pork from something slaughtered weeks ago. There's bread, dense dark bread made from rye flour, and more of the weak ale that everyone drinks throughout the day. Strong ale is reserved for feast days and special occasions. Water alone would be unsafe, so everyone, including children, drinks ale. You eat together, the 4 of you, in the flickering firelight. Your father talks about the fields. The weather is good for planting, the soil is warming. He mentions that old Godwin, who works the strips to the north, fell from his ladder while repairing the barn and broke his leg. There's sympathy in your father's voice, because a broken leg means Godwin can't work, and if he can't work, he can't pay his obligations to the Lord. There are jokes too, grim medieval jokes about bad fortune and the inevitability of suffering. Your brother, younger than you by 4 years, is restless and eating quickly, eager to be done and free to play before full darkness comes. After the meal, your parents settle by the fire. Your mother brings out her spinning wheel and begins to work, the treadle working steadily, the wheel spinning, the thread growing under her experienced hands. You watch this almost every evening. The rhythm of her work is as familiar as your own heartbeat. She spins while your father cleans and repairs his tools, and sometimes he tells stories about things that happened years ago before you were born. Tonight he tells the story of the Great Storm, when lightning struck the church tower and nearly set it on fire. Everyone helped to save it, he says, women and men both, forming bucket lines from the well to the roof. The Lord himself helped, which was unusual. Lords don't typically work alongside peasants. But the church was precious to everyone, and it was saved. And that winter there was a feast to celebrate. These stories are your history, the collective memory of the village. You have no written records, no chronicles. There are no books in your cottage, no written words at all, except perhaps a mark your father can make to sign his name. The priest has books in the church, a Bible, a lectionary, books of liturgy, but those are sacred objects beyond the reach of ordinary people. Your learning comes through listening, watching, and doing. It's an entirely different way of knowing the world than the scribes and monks in the monastery possess. As the darkness becomes complete, your father brings in the animals from the small pen outside. A pig, a few chickens, a goat. They sleep under the same roof as you, in a section of the cottage separated by a low wall but still sharing the same air, the same warmth of the fire. The animals' manure will accumulate throughout the winter, and in spring it will be scraped up and used to fertilise the garden. Nothing is wasted, nothing is random. Your mother eventually puts away her spinning, her hands moving in the practised motion of securing the thread and stopping the wheel. You help her tidy the space, and then you climb the ladder to the sleeping loft. Your younger brother is already asleep, curled up in the corner. Your parents will follow later, after making sure the fire is safely banked for the night. And tomorrow, you'll wake to bells ringing and begin again, the endless repetitive work of keeping a medieval household alive. Sunday is different. On Sundays, you stop work, at least most work, and go to church. This is the law of both the church and the Lord, though the Lord is mostly interested in ensuring people don't use Sunday to work their own fields instead of his. But the church is genuinely important, and you've been going to Mass since before you can remember. The walk to the church takes perhaps 10 minutes, down the lane and into the centre of the village where the church sits on slightly higher ground, its stone walls solid and permanent in a way that the wooden cottages never are. The church is built of stone quarried from a place that your father says is 3 days' walk away, hauled here over many years, many generations to build something that will last. The bell tower rises high enough that you can see it from the fields, a marker that guides you home if you ever get lost in the woods. Inside, the church is surprisingly ornate given how poor the village is. There's a carved wooden rood screen separating the nave where you stand from the chancel where the altar is. Above it hangs a crucifix painted in fading reds and golds. The walls have paintings, frescoes done by travelling artists perhaps decades ago, pictures of saints with golden halos, images meant to teach you about holy stories and holy people. One wall shows the Nativity, Mary holding the infant Jesus while shepherds look on. Another shows scenes of martyrdom that are actually kind of horrifying, saints being roasted or stabbed or shot full of arrows while maintaining serene expressions. You don't fully understand the Latin that Father Cuthbert speaks. Few people do. The priest himself sometimes seems unsure of the correct pronunciation, and you've heard older villagers whisper that he's not the most educated priest, that he sometimes gets the liturgy wrong. But it doesn't really matter. The point is the ritual, the repetition, the feeling of being part of something larger than yourself. You stand through the Mass, listening to the familiar words even if you don't understand them. The congregation responds at the right moments, and you've learned those responses, Ave, Dominus, Amen, though you don't think much about what they mean. Your mother stands beside you, your father beyond her. The women and girls mostly stand on one side of the church, the men and boys on the other, separated by tradition and the rood screen. At the consecration, everyone kneels. This is the most sacred moment, when Father Cuthbert holds up the bread and the wine, and through the mystery of the Mass, they become the body and blood of Christ. You're not supposed to actually receive communion unless you're especially holy or about to die. Most villagers receive it only once a year, at Easter, but you kneel with everyone else, and you feel the weight of that moment, the sense that something holy is happening even though you can't quite understand what. After the Mass ends, people linger. There's gossip, news, the social business of the village conducted on the church steps and in the churchyard. Your mother talks with Goodwife Kate about the early spring. Your father discusses the Lord's upcoming demands. Apparently the Lord needs workers for some major repair to his demesne. There's also talk of a travelling merchant who passed through yesterday, with news from the larger towns, though you don't catch all of it. Something about politics and the king, distant things that affect your village mostly in the form of increased taxes or military obligations. You notice some of the older girls perhaps a year or two older than you, have begun receiving attention from some of the village boys. Looks are exchanged, conversations are struck up after Mass. These are the preliminary negotiations of courtship, though everyone pretends they're incidental meetings. Marriages are arranged by fathers, but there's still a dance, a careful process of establishing interest before the practical negotiations begin. One girl, Agnes, seems particularly interested in a boy named Robert who works on the Lord's domain. You see them talking, standing close, and there's something in the way they look at each other that makes you feel both fascinated and slightly uncomfortable. This is your future too, probably. Somewhere in the village or beyond it, there's a boy who will eventually be your husband, and you'll go through this same process of being displayed at church, being assessed, being negotiated for like a piece of property, which essentially you are. The walk home from church is leisurely. People are in good spirits, children run ahead. The day stretches ahead of you, free from most formal work. Your mother will still need to cook, and there are always small tasks, mending, tending the garden, caring for the animals, but there's no spinning, no heavy labour. Some people might sit by the church and talk for hours. Your father might nap. You might be allowed to play with other children, though play at your age is becoming less common. You're entering that strange in-between time where you're too old for the games of small children, but not yet fully a woman. The church is your connection to the larger world. Through the stories Father Cuthbert tells, through the paintings on the walls, through the festivals and feast days marked by the church calendar, you understand that there's a huge world beyond your village. There are kings and queens, there are faraway lands, there's Rome where the Pope lives. You probably won't ever leave your village, but the church reminds you that you're part of something greater. As the weeks progress, spring fully arrives, the cold fades, and the world greens explosively. Your family's garden plot, a strip of land just behind the cottage, becomes your responsibility. It's not large, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet, but it's crucial. This is where you'll grow the vegetables that supplement the bread and pottage that form the main diet for most of the year. Your mother shows you which seeds to plant and when. The timing is crucial. Too early and a late frost will kill the seedlings. Too late and you won't have enough growing season before the heat of summer slows growth. She has seeds saved from last year. Dried peas, beans, cabbage, turnips, onions, stored carefully in cloth bags in the driest part of the cottage. She also has some seeds that a travelling merchant brought, including some lettuce seeds from farther south. Planting is back-breaking work. You have to dig the soil, breaking up the clods, removing the rocks that always seem to be present despite being cleared the previous year. Your back aches by the end of the first day. Your hands, even calloused as they are from spinning, develop new blisters. But gradually over the course of a week the garden is prepared. You create small rows, and then you kneel and push seeds into the earth, one by one, at the proper spacing that your mother has taught you. These are the seeds of survival, your mother says, watching you work. Learn to grow food, and you can survive anywhere. Marry a man, even a poor man, and as long as you can grow vegetables and keep chickens and make cheese, your children won't starve. This is the unspoken knowledge that every medieval woman carries, that your value in the world rests on your ability to produce, to keep a household running. Marriage is the framework of your life, but within that framework your worth comes from what you can do with your hands. As spring advances, the village is also busy with the Lord's work. Peasants owe labour services to the Lord in exchange for the right to farm their own strips of land and keep a cottage. Your father owes several days of work each week. Sometimes this is ploughing the Lord's domain, sometimes it's repairing buildings or fences, sometimes it's collecting rents or taxes from other villagers. It's part of the system that holds everything together, though it's also sometimes resented. People grumble about the amount of labour demanded, about the Lord being too greedy. Some years are better than others, apparently. An older man mentioned once that your lord is actually reasonably fair compared to some others in the region. There are lords known for demanding excessive labour, for heavy-handed punishments, for taking advantage of their position in ways that go beyond the normal feudal obligations. Your lord seems content with the standard arrangement. The village itself becomes a hub of activity as spring progresses. Repairs to cottages are made while the weather is good. The blacksmith is constantly busy. The mill is processing grain from last year's harvest, and the miller's family is nearly always present, overseeing the work and collecting their share, a portion of every batch ground, taken as payment for milling. The church priest is preparing for Easter, which is the biggest feast day of the year, when people make special efforts to clean and prepare, when meat is sometimes available, a luxury, when people attend church with extra devotion. You notice that the village is also preparing for spring births. Several women are obviously pregnant, including your neighbour Emma, who will soon have her second child. Goodwife Marjorie, the midwife, is especially busy gathering herbs and preparing her medicines. You overhear your mother and Goodwife Kate discussing one of the pregnant women, expressing some concern about her because she's very young, and this is her first child. Apparently first births are more dangerous than subsequent ones. The body hasn't been stretched and prepared by previous pregnancies, so complications are more likely. There's a dark pragmatism to these discussions. Death in childbirth is understood as one of the risks of being a woman, something that happens sometimes, something you hope won't happen to you, but something that you accept. You've lost cousins to childbirth. Your father's sister died giving birth to her third child when you were very young, though you don't remember her. These are the facts of your world. One evening, your mother begins teaching you about the herbs that help with childbirth. She shows you which plants to gather and how to dry them, which ones help with pain, which ones help with bleeding, which ones are used to ease difficult labours. This knowledge is passed woman to woman, carefully guarded, jealously protected. Men don't know these secrets, and there's an implicit understanding that they never will. This is women's power, understanding the mysteries of the body, managing the crises of reproduction, ensuring that new life comes into the world. When you marry and become pregnant, your mother says, her hands busy crushing dried herbs with a mortar and pestle. You'll need to know these things, and you'll need to know which older women in your new village are trustworthy, who will come if you send for them in the night, who knows the old ways of helping. This knowledge feels both precious and terrifying. You're simultaneously being prepared for something inevitable and something that frightens you. Around midsummer, when the days are longest and the heat is most intense, something unexpected happens. Your father comes home with news that changes the trajectory of your life. He's arranged a betrothal for you. You're not yet 15. The boy is named Thomas, and he's the son of a prosperous farmer from the next village, about an hour's walk away. Your father negotiated for weeks, apparently, before telling you anything. The betrothal had to be agreed to by both families, the terms had to be settled, and the dowry had to be discussed and arranged. Your father has agreed to provide a dowry of 20 shillings in coin, plus a bolt of fine linen cloth that your mother will weave specifically for the purpose. It's a substantial dowry. Your family clearly intends to make a good impression, to secure a strong match. The betrothal ceremony takes place in the church, with Father Cuthbert as witness. Thomas comes to your village with his father and several neighbours as witnesses. He's older than you, probably 22 or 23, which is typical. Men usually marry later than women, after they've accumulated some property or established themselves in their work. Thomas is a competent-looking man, neither handsome nor ugly. He's somewhat reserved, though that might be nervousness. You've never really spoken to him before, and you certainly haven't chosen him. But you understand that choice in marriage is not a right that peasant girls possess. During the ceremony, Father Cuthbert speaks about the sacrament of marriage, though the actual marriage won't take place for perhaps another year. The betrothal is a legal contract binding both you and Thomas. If either of you were to marry someone else now, you'd be committing a serious transgression. Rings are exchanged. Simple iron rings made by the blacksmith. Nothing fancy, but meaningful nonetheless. Thomas's ring is slightly too large for your finger, and you'll have to wear it tied with thread so it doesn't fall off. "I'll do my best to be a good husband," Thomas says quietly, meeting your eyes for probably the first time. He's not particularly eloquent, but there's sincerity in his voice. "Your father tells me you're a hard worker." You nod because you don't know what else to do. You're a hard worker, yes, that's what matters. Love is not part of the bargain. Respect, compatibility, the ability to work together, these are the hopes. Some couples probably come to care for each other, others probably tolerate each other. Either way, the marriage is for life, or until one of you dies. The betrothal celebration is modest. Bread, cheese, weak ale, and for this special occasion some mead that someone has brought. There's music of a sort. A neighbour plays a simple wooden pipe, and there's dancing, though you feel too self-conscious to dance much. Thomas's father spends time talking with your father about land, about property, about the future. When they leave, late in the afternoon, Thomas is somewhat awkward in his farewell. He touches your shoulder briefly, then leaves. Once they're gone, you feel a strange combination of emotions. Relief that it's over, fear about what comes next, a peculiar sense of loss for the life you were living just hours ago. Your mother embraces you, and you see tears in her eyes, though you're not sure if they're happy tears or sad tears. "You'll be a good wife," she says firmly. "You know how to work, you know how to manage a household. His mother will teach you their ways and you'll adapt." Your father is pleased with the arrangement. He's managed to secure you a match with a family of better standing than your own, which is a good outcome. The dowry is substantial but not ruinous. In a year's time, there will be a wedding, and you'll move to your new home. For the next week, everyone treats you slightly differently. Goodwife Kate comes by to offer congratulations. Neighbours mention it when they see you. You've moved, in the space of an afternoon, from being a girl to being a betrothed woman. It's a subtle shift, but it changes how people interact with you. Your mother intensifies your training for household management. She's suddenly focused on making sure you know everything about running a home, how to plan meals for a year, how to preserve food for winter, how to manage a vegetable garden in different soils and climates. She spends extra time teaching you about herbs and medicines. She even begins teaching you a few things about managing a husband, how to handle a man who's tired or irritable, how to maintain peace in a household, how to navigate the authority structures of marriage where your husband is technically in charge, but you manage the daily operations. A wife's real power, your mother tells you, is quiet and hidden. You may answer to your husband, but the household answers to you. Remember this. It's advice that confuses you a little. How can you have power while answering to someone else? But you understand that there's a complexity to women's lives that isn't immediately visible. The year between betrothal and marriage seems to stretch impossibly long. You're in a strange state of suspended animation, no longer quite a girl, but not yet a wife. Your daily work continues as before, spinning, gardening, household tasks. But now there's an intensity to the training your mother provides, and a peculiar sense that you're preparing for an exam that you can't quite study for. Thomas occasionally visits, riding over from his village with his father, or sometimes with a neighbour. The visits are formal and slightly awkward. You're expected to demonstrate your skills. Your mother has you spin in front of him, show him the garden, demonstrate your knowledge of cooking and household management. Sometimes you walk with him, chaperoned by your mother, through the village or along the lane. You begin to know him slightly better, though any real familiarity remains distant. He talks about his father's land, about the work he does, about his plans for the future. He asks you questions about your daily life, though the conversation never quite reaches the level of genuine intimacy. You notice that Thomas is increasingly recognised in your village as your betrothed. Some of the young men seem to regard you with a different kind of attention. You're no longer available, and that changes how they interact with you. Girls your age who aren't yet betrothed suddenly seem younger, still in the playing phase of life, while you've moved beyond that into the serious business of adult expectations. The waiting period is filled with work. Your mother is weaving your dowry cloth, a beautiful linen that will become your wedding dress. It's being woven slowly and carefully. The loom sits in one corner of the cottage, and your mother works on it whenever she has time, moving the shuttle back and forth, building up the cloth inch by inch. Your father has saved coin carefully, and the dowry of 20 shillings sits in a cloth bag that you're not supposed to touch, hidden carefully away. It will be given to Thomas's family at the wedding. In addition to the formal dowry, your mother is preparing goods that will help you establish yourself in Thomas's household. She's teaching you to weave small items, napkins, cloths for various purposes. She's guiding you through the full cycle of wool processing and cloth making, understanding that you'll probably need to produce cloth for your household, rather than just acquiring it. You're also learning to make cheese, to brew ale, to preserve vegetables for winter. Every practical skill is being transmitted from her hands to yours. There are also less tangible preparations. Your mother talks about marriage more frequently now, explaining what will happen on your wedding night and after. She's matter-of-fact about it, discussing it the way she discusses gardening or cooking. A husband will expect to consummate the marriage. Pain is normal the first time. After that, it becomes a regular part of marriage, something to be managed along with all the other aspects of shared life. Pregnancy will probably follow relatively quickly. You should expect to be pregnant frequently once you're married, unless God chooses not to grant you children. Some women bear a child nearly every year until they can no longer conceive. Others have long gaps. It's partly in God's hands and partly about how well nourished and healthy you are. This information is both abstract and terrifying. You understand it intellectually, but you can't quite make it real in your mind. You watch married women, your mother, Goodwife Kate, Emma, and try to imagine what their private lives must be like, but you can't quite form a complete picture. In the autumn of your betrothal year, the village goes through the harvest. This is the busiest time of year, when everyone works from sunrise to sunset gathering in the grain. Your mother is still responsible for household tasks and you work beside her, but you also go to help in the fields. You're not as strong as adult women yet, but you can gather sheaves and bind them. You can help transport grain to the Lord's granary and to your own stores. The harvest is gruelling work, but there's also a festive quality to it. The last sheaf is celebrated, and there's singing and a special meal. The Lord often provides extra food, sometimes even meat for the harvest workers. There's a sense of shared labour, all the village working together for survival, for the continuation of life through another winter. During this time you see Thomas working in the fields too, helping with the harvest though. He's not from your village. He works steadily and competently, and you notice other young women glancing at him occasionally, probably wondering what it's like that you're betrothed to someone who's reasonably attractive and clearly capable. There's a certain status in that, even if the match wasn't your choice. As autumn turns to winter, the wedding date approaches. It's set for late February, after the worst of the winter has passed but before the spring planting begins. Your mother completes your dowry cloth and it's a beautiful thing. Fine linen with a slight sheen, dyed a pale cream colour. It will become your wedding dress. You'll wear it once and then it will be cut apart and made into everyday clothing or linen for the household. Before we continue toward your wedding, let's pause and consider a different path that some girls take. While most medieval girls are destined for marriage and housekeeping, some are given to convents as children. These girls will never marry. They'll spend their lives as nuns in cloistered communities devoted to prayer and work. The reasons for this vary. Sometimes a family has too many daughters and too little dowry for all of them, so one or more is given to the convent as a solution. Sometimes a family wants to secure the prayers of a holy community and offers a daughter as a kind of sacrifice to God. Sometimes a girl is offered because she shows religious inclination, or because her parents genuinely believe she has a vocation. And sometimes convents are refuges for girls who are disabled or ill in ways that would make marriage unlikely. Imagine that you were given to a convent at age 7, as some children are. You'd be brought to a community of women who have all taken vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. Your daily life would be structured entirely around religious observance. You'd wake before dawn to the sound of the bell signalling matins, the first of the 8 daily prayer services. You'd dress in the dark, in the cold, and make your way to the chapel, where the nuns gather for hours of prayer and chanting in Latin. The prayer services follow a pattern: matins and lauds at night and dawn, prime at sunrise, terce at mid-morning, sext at midday, none in the afternoon, vespers at evening, and compline before sleep. The rhythm of these services, 7 times a day when you stop all other work and pray, structures every aspect of your existence. There's no privacy, no personal time. You eat in silence while someone reads scripture. You work in silence. You sleep in a dormitory with other nuns, and even there, silence is maintained. The work within a convent is different from the work of a village girl. Some nuns do manual labour, gardening, cooking, cleaning, but many convents, especially the larger ones, are also centres of learning and literacy. Some nuns copy manuscripts, producing the books that preserve knowledge. Others study Latin and theology. A girl with aptitude might learn to read and write, a skill that would be almost impossible for her to acquire outside the convent. But this learning comes at a cost. You'd be taught to despise your body, to view any impulse toward vanity or physical comfort as sinful. You'd be taught that earthly desires, for food, for warmth, for companionship beyond your sisters in faith, are obstacles to holiness. Many medieval nuns practiced strict asceticism, eating minimal food, wearing rough cloth that irritated the skin, sleeping on hard beds. Some engaged in self-mortification, whipping themselves or wearing hair shirts as penance for being human. A famous nun from the medieval period was Hildegard of Bingen, who lived from 1098 to 1179. She entered a convent as a child and eventually became an abbess, the leader of her community. Hildegard was exceptionally learned and creative. She wrote theological works, composed music, created medical texts based on her observations of herbs and healing. She corresponded with popes and kings and queens. She became one of the most influential women of her time, but she achieved this influence specifically because she was in a convent, outside the normal restrictions on women's power. The lives of convent girls varied tremendously depending on the community. Some convents were strict and austere, focused entirely on prayer and denial. Others were more relaxed, allowing for intellectual work and a higher quality of life. Some convents were genuinely places of learning and spiritual development. Others were more like prisons where girls were stored to solve the problem of unwanted daughters or excess daughters. Unlike village girls, convent girls didn't bear the burden of marriage and childbirth. No man owned them. No man could demand physical relations or labour from them. They were married to Christ, a spiritual marriage that required no physical consummation. From one perspective, this was freedom. Freedom from the pain and danger of childbirth. Freedom from the authority of a husband. Freedom from the endless physical labour of maintaining a household. But from another perspective, it was imprisonment. You'd never have your own children, never have a home that was truly yours, never make independent decisions about your life. You'd be subject to the authority of an abbess instead of a husband, potentially better, potentially worse. You'd never experience romantic love or physical affection. You'd spend your life in prayer, mostly in silence, in isolation from the larger world. Some girls who were sent to convents rebelled and left. Others adjusted and found meaning in the spiritual life. A few, like Hildegard, found the convent to be a place where their exceptional abilities could be developed and expressed. If you were in a convent right now instead of preparing for marriage, you'd be in the scriptorium, copying a manuscript, your fingers stained with ink, your eyes straining in candlelight. Your back would ache from bending over the work. Your hands would be cold from the stone walls of the convent. But you'd also be learning to read and write, acquiring knowledge that very few women possess. You'd be part of a community of women, and within that community some women held real power and authority. It's an entirely different life, with different costs and different benefits. The vast majority of medieval girls never had the chance to choose this path. But for those girls given to convents, whether by choice, circumstance, or necessity, it represented the only alternative to the marriage that awaited almost every other woman born in medieval Europe. December comes, and with it the reality that your wedding is now only a couple of months away. Winter settles in hard, and the village contracts inward. The pace of work changes. There's no more harvesting, no more outdoor labour beyond the most essential tasks. Instead, you're focused on preparing for the wedding and managing the household through the cold months. The weather is bitter. Snow comes early this year, heavier than usual. Your father is out less frequently, and when he returns from any necessary work, he's exhausted and sometimes even injured. He slipped on ice once and injured his shoulder, though it's healing. The animals huddle in their corner of the cottage, and sometimes you feel almost grateful for their warmth. Your wedding dress, the linen cloth that your mother wove, is being made up by a travelling seamstress who came through the village in November. The dress is being constructed in the simple style that you'll wear, a tunic of linen with a surcoat of wool over it, with an overdress in a deeper blue dye. The colours and fabrics reflect your family's modest prosperity. You're not wealthy enough for silk or elaborate decoration, but you're not so poor that you're marrying in rags. The seamstress is adding a narrow trim of embroidery around the neckline, a small luxury that your mother insisted on. But as the wedding approaches, you're beginning to feel genuinely frightened. The knowledge that your mother imparted about marriage, the physical aspects of it, the childbearing that will almost certainly follow, suddenly feels very real. You're going to leave your home, your mother, your familiar world, and go to live with a man you barely know in a village where you'll have no established relationships or position. The power structures are becoming clear to you in a way they weren't before. In a village marriage, your husband's mother has authority over you. She'll determine much of what you do, how you manage the household, what your daily routine will be. Your husband's authority supersedes any independence you might have. If he wants to sell your labour for extra income, he can. If he wants you to live in extreme deprivation, you have no recourse. If he's cruel to you, there are limited options for escape. You might be able to return to your family temporarily if the situation is unbearable, but ultimately you're bound to him until one of you dies. Your mother seems to sense your fear, though you haven't spoken about it explicitly. One evening she sits down beside you as you're spinning and takes your hands in hers. "You're frightened," she says. "It's not a question." "Yes," you admit. "That's normal. I was frightened too when I married your father. I was only 14, younger than you are now, and I barely knew him." She pauses. "But he turned out to be a good man. Not unkind, not demanding beyond what's normal. We've built a good life together." "What if Thomas isn't kind?" you ask, the fear that's been lurking in your mind finally spoken aloud. "Then you'll endure it, as many women endure much worse." Your mother's tone is matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "From what I know of his family, they're respectable people. His mother has a reputation for being fair. His father is reasonably prosperous. You could marry far worse." "But what if—" You start, but you're not sure how to complete the thought. What if he beats you? What if he's unfaithful? What if he gambles away your bride gift? What if he makes impossible demands? "Then you'll do as your mother did," your mother says quietly. "You'll do what you must to survive and to keep your household running as well as you can. You'll bear your children. You'll make the best life you can with the man and the situation you've been given." This isn't comforting exactly, but it's grounding. Your mother's matter-of-factness, her acknowledgement that life is often difficult and that you simply endure what comes, somehow makes it more bearable than if she tried to promise you that everything will be wonderful. She reaches out and adjusts your head covering, which has slipped slightly. "You're going to be a good wife. You know how to work. You're intelligent. You can manage a household. These are the things that matter. Do these things well and you'll be respected, and that respect will make your life better." Over the winter, as you prepare for the wedding, you also begin to understand more about your position in the social order. You're a peasant girl, marrying a peasant farmer. You'll never be wealthy, never be powerful in any formal sense, never have the kind of freedom that nobility enjoys. But within your household, within your village, there's a kind of power available to women who manage well, who earn respect through competence and hard work. You notice this when you watch your mother. When people have problems, they often come to her, asking her advice about health matters, about household management, about disputes. She doesn't have formal authority, but her knowledge and competence have created a kind of informal power. She's listened to and respected. People make accommodations for her opinion. This, you're beginning to understand, is what you can aspire to. Not wealth or status, not the kind of power that men have through inheritance and law, but the kind of influence that comes from being genuinely necessary to people's survival and well-being. As February approaches, you're still frightened, but the fear has become more manageable. You've accepted that your life is changing, and you're preparing yourself to face that change with courage. February brings the wedding closer still. The date is set for the 20th of the month, on a Friday, when the weather should be cold but hopefully without heavy snow. Thomas comes to the village a few days before with more of his family. His mother, a younger brother, some cousins. This is the wedding party, and they'll stay with various families in your village for a few days while the preparations are made. Your mother is simultaneously excited and nervous. She's preparing food for the wedding feast: bread, cheese, ale, and if your father's resources allow, some meat. He's arranged with a neighbour to slaughter a pig, so there will be fresh meat for the celebration. There will also be pies made with preserved fruit from last autumn. It's a festive occasion, but modest by the standards of wealthier families. Thomas's mother arrives and meets your mother formally. You watch them interact with great nervousness. If they don't get along, your married life could be much more difficult. But they seem to regard each other neutrally, and by evening they're talking comfortably about household management and the work that will be required of you as the mistress of Thomas's household. She's young, Thomas's mother, whose name is Eleanor, observes to your mother while you're pretending to work at your spinning and listening intently. But capable, your mother responds firmly. She can spin, weave, manage a household, cook, garden. She knows the herbs for healing. She's a hard worker. That's good, Eleanor says. The work never ends, as you know. I'll have her help me with much of it at first until she learns our ways. But eventually she'll manage most of the household tasks while I take on lighter work as I age. This is the natural progression of women's lives. When you're young and strong, you do the heaviest work. As you age and have children and become less physically capable, you delegate to younger women. Eventually, if you live long enough, you might spend your final years doing lighter work or managing the household from a position of authority while younger hands do the labour. The wedding is held in the church on Friday morning. You've been awake since before dawn, unable to sleep from nervousness. Your mother helped you dress in the new wedding dress, and you've never felt so formal, so marked as different. The dress is beautiful, and you know it's probably the finest thing you'll own in your life. The church is full. Not everyone comes, but most of the village is there, along with Thomas's family and neighbours from his village. Father Cuthbert performs the ceremony, speaking Latin words that you don't understand, though you catch the familiar cadence of the liturgy. You exchange vows, though the words are spoken so quietly that only Father Cuthbert probably hears them clearly. Thomas's ring is replaced with your actual wedding band, and a second ring is placed on his hand. These rings will never come off. There's no kiss. That comes after the ceremony, in front of everyone, and you feel your face flush as Thomas leans forward and briefly touches his lips to yours. It's not unpleasant, just formal and slightly awkward. The crowd around the church cheers and claps, and you feel simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. The feast is held at your family's cottage and the neighbouring cottages, tables set up outside despite the cold, food shared among everyone. There's music, the pipe player from the village, and a man from Thomas's village who plays a simple stringed instrument. There's dancing, and Thomas takes your hand and leads you through a dance while people clap and cheer. Some of the dancing is quite rowdy, with married couples doing movements that make you blush. By evening, you're exhausted. Your face aches from smiling. The food is nearly gone. The darkness has fallen completely, and people are beginning to leave, heading to their cottages or to the houses where they're staying. Your mother pulls you aside. "Come," she says quietly, "I'll help you prepare." She leads you to the sleeping loft away from the crowd. Your new husband will come in a while, but first you're being prepared. Your mother helps you out of the wedding dress, which will never be worn again in its current form, and into a sleeping shift. She's brought a small vessel of oil, something precious, and she shows you how to use it on the night of marriage, advice that her own mother gave her. "It will hurt," she says quietly, "the first time, but it gets easier. Most men aren't cruel about it, but some are. If Thomas is kind, count yourself fortunate." She adjusts your sleeping shift. "You might bleed. Don't be frightened, it's normal. Everyone bleeds the first time." She leaves you alone in the loft and you sit on the edge of the bed, which is yours and Thomas's now, and wait. You can hear people talking downstairs, laughing. Someone is still playing music. Then Thomas comes up the ladder, somewhat unsteady from the ale he's been drinking, but not drunk enough to be dangerous. He smells like sweat and cold air and the fire from the feast. He removes his outer clothes and you see his body for the first time. He's lean and muscled from farm work and he's clearly aroused, which is both frightening and somehow not as shocking as you'd expected. He approaches the bed, and what happens next is exactly what your mother described, and yet somehow also more real, more present, more overwhelming than you could have anticipated while lying in your own bed in your father's cottage, preparing for this moment. You wake in the grey pre-dawn light with Thomas's arm across your chest. For a moment you don't remember where you are, and then it all comes back to you. The wedding, the night, the shocking physicality of marriage that you experienced for the first time just hours ago. Your body aches. There's blood on the linen, as your mother said there would be. Your thighs are sore and there's a kind of tender discomfort between your legs that makes you wince when you move. But Thomas is sleeping, and his arm across you is warm and somehow not unpleasant, so you lie still and try to process what has happened to you. You're married now. This is your life. This man sleeping beside you is your husband, and you'll share this bed with him for the rest of your life, until one of you dies. The reality of it hits you with a kind of weight that you haven't fully felt until this moment. Gradually, as the light increases, the household comes awake. You hear Thomas's mother moving around downstairs. She and your father-in-law slept in your parents' cottage, since your mother has temporarily moved to stay with a neighbour to give you privacy. You hear your own mother's voice and footsteps. Thomas wakes, stretches, and seems unsurprised by the intimacy of waking beside you. He gets up, naked without any apparent self-consciousness, and dresses. He doesn't speak much, just touches your shoulder briefly and heads downstairs. You lie still for another moment, gathering the courage to get up and face the day. Then you rise carefully and wash yourself with water from the pitcher your mother left. The blood on the linen is evidence of your virginity, proof that the marriage was properly consummated. This proof is important. It means you were untouched when you married, that you were a virgin bride as you should have been. If you hadn't bled, there would be questions, suspicions, perhaps even dispute about whether the marriage was valid. By the time you come downstairs, dressed in your regular clothes, the cottage is full of people. Your mother is there, along with Thomas's mother, and several other women from both villages. They're preparing food, making bread, stirring pottage, preparing the meat from yesterday's feast for eating again today. The work of the day is already well underway. "Ah, there she is," one of the village women says with a knowing smile. "Look at her. Walking a bit tender this morning, aren't we?" You feel your face flush, but the other women seem to think this is hilarious and appropriate. There's something almost ceremonial about their acknowledgement of what happened last night. You're no longer a girl, you're a woman. The consumption of the marriage and the proof of your virginity have marked that transition officially. Your mother hugs you briefly. "How do you feel?" she asks quietly, and you can tell she's genuinely concerned. "Sore," you admit, but okay, it was frightening. "It gets better," she says simply. "The fear lessens, the soreness goes away, and sometimes—" She pauses and there's a slight smile on her face. "Sometimes it can be pleasant, though not always, and not necessarily the first time." This is surprising information. You'd been taught to view the marital act primarily as a duty, and as something that would be uncomfortable or painful. The idea that it might be pleasant is startling. Thomas comes in from outside and treats you with casual friendliness, as though last night was already in the past. He speaks to his mother, makes plans for returning to his village tomorrow, discusses the weather and the condition of the roads. He doesn't treat you any differently than he might treat a servant, and oddly this is comforting. There's no mockery, but also no particular intimacy or tenderness. It's simply matter of fact. By evening, after another day of festive eating and work and socialising, Thomas comes to you again. This time you're slightly less frightened, and the experience is marginally less painful, though still uncomfortable. He's quicker than the night before, and when he's done, he simply rolls away and falls asleep, leaving you to lie awake in the darkness, processing this new development of your life. The next morning, Thomas and his family prepare to leave. The road back to his village has been packed down by travellers, and the weather is decent, cold but not snowing. There's a formal goodbye, with your mother and the other women from the village seeing them off. Thomas tells you that he'll come back in a few days to collect you and your belongings. You'll return with him to your new home, where you'll live with him and his family for probably the rest of your life. After they leave, you help your mother clean up the cottages, removing the extra beds and tables that were brought in for the wedding. The village settles back into its normal rhythm. But you're different now. Everyone acknowledges it, treats you with a different kind of respect. You're a married woman, and that status changes how you move through the world. Within a week, Thomas returns with a cart, and your belongings are loaded into it. Your dowry goods, some extra clothing, a few items your mother insists you take. You embrace your mother for what you know won't be the last time, but what feels significant nonetheless. You're leaving the only home you've ever known. The ride to Thomas's village takes the entire day. You sit in the cart on top of folded cloth, travelling over rutted roads, seeing landscape that becomes gradually less familiar. The villages you pass are similar to yours but not identical. The church is in a slightly different spot. The houses have a different arrangement. The fields are divided differently. Thomas's village is larger than yours, with perhaps 30 households instead of 20. The manor house is larger too, and the lord's domain is more extensive. You learn that Thomas's father is actually one of the more prosperous farmers in this village, which explains Eleanor's confident bearing and the relative prosperity of their household. Their cottage is larger than your parents', 2 rooms instead of 1, with a separate area for cooking and a sleeping loft above. There's a small barn nearby and a more extensive garden plot. It's clearly a successful farming operation, and you feel a flutter of something. Relief, perhaps, that you're not marrying into poverty. Eleanor shows you around, pointing out where things are stored, how the household is organised, what your daily duties will be. She's not unkind, but she's also clearly in charge, and you understand immediately that your role is to learn her preferences and her systems, not to introduce your own ways. Thomas works during the day. He's out in the fields, checking on the strips of land that he and his father work, making repairs to the property, doing whatever tasks the manor demands. You don't see him until evening when he comes home for the meal. Eleanor has prepared something substantial, pottage with meat, fresh bread, cheese, ale, and the 3 of you eat together in relative silence. Your first task is to understand the garden plot. Eleanor takes you out, and even though it's February and nothing is growing, she shows you where everything is planted, what your responsibilities will be as spring comes. She's clearly knowledgeable about herb growing, and you understand that you'll be expected to become similarly knowledgeable. She also shows you a small area where she grows particularly valuable herbs, medicinal plants that she uses for healing, which she supplements by gathering wild plants in the forest. Women rely on us for healing knowledge, Eleanor tells you, as she points out the small plants that she's carefully tended through the winter. When someone is hurt or ill, when a baby is born, when a woman is suffering monthly pains, these are women's remedies, passed from woman to woman. I'll teach you as my mother taught me. This is similar to what your mother taught you, but Eleanor's knowledge seems deeper, more extensive. She has dried herbs organised by purpose, and she shows you how to identify them, how to prepare them, how to use them for various ailments. Over the following weeks, as spring begins to come to this new village, you settle into your new life. The work is similar to what you did at home: spinning, gardening, cooking, household maintenance. But the rhythms are Eleanor's, not your mother's. You learn her preferences for how things should be done, where things should be stored, what the priority of work should be. Thomas continues to come to you at night, and you continue to find the experience slightly unpleasant but manageable. You're beginning to understand that some of the pain is because of tension and fear, and that on the nights when you're more relaxed, when you've already done the strenuous physical work of the day and your mind is tired, the experience is somewhat better. You miss your mother with an intensity that surprises you. You didn't expect to be homesick. You expected to adapt and move on. But you find yourself thinking about her in the evenings, wondering what she's doing, whether she misses you. You wonder if your younger brother is being properly fed, if your father remembers to have someone help with the heavy work you used to do. About 6 weeks after the wedding, you realise that you haven't bled since before the wedding. Ellen notices this at the same time you do, and she gives you a knowing look. "You're pregnant," she says, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "How are you feeling? Any sickness?" You hadn't mentioned to her that you've been feeling slightly nauseated in the mornings, thinking it was just the nerves and adjustment of being in a new place. But apparently your body has been telling a different story. Some, you admit. "That's normal," Eleanor says. "You'll likely feel worse for a few weeks, then it passes. We'll need to adjust your work. Don't lift heavy things, and let me know if you feel dizzy or faint. So quickly, within just 6 weeks of marriage, your life is shifting again. You're not just a new wife, you're a pregnant woman. The knowledge that your body is growing a child, a person that will depend on you completely, is overwhelming. You write a message to your mother through the next traveller who comes through, asking Thomas to pay for a message to be delivered. It's not words written down, you can't write, but Thomas carries the message verbally to a travelling merchant who's heading toward your village. The message is simple: tell my mother that I'm well, that I'm pregnant, and that I miss her. The response comes back a few weeks later, and though it's not written, Thomas brings it to you. Your mother says she's proud of you, that pregnancy is a woman's destiny, and that you must be very careful and eat well. She sends her love. This small connection across the distance helps more than you would have expected. You're embarking on yet another transition, from girl to wife to mother, all within the span of just a few months. As the weeks progress and your pregnancy becomes obvious, your belly swelling, your body changing in ways that feel both miraculous and alarming, Eleanor takes on the role of teaching you about what to expect. She brings you to meet Goodwife Margot, the midwife of this village, and the three of you discuss the pregnancy, the birth that will come, and what to prepare. Goodwife Margot is perhaps 50 years old, with strong, capable hands and eyes that have clearly seen much. She's delivered hundreds of babies, she tells you, and most of them are born healthy, and most of their mothers survive. This is meant to be reassuring, and in a way it is, except that it also acknowledges that some babies are born dead, and some mothers don't survive. First births are the hardest, Goodwife Margot tells you plainly. Your body hasn't done this before, so it doesn't know how. You'll feel pain the likes of which you've never experienced. It will come in waves, and between the waves, it will ease slightly, giving you rest. When it's time to push, you push with all your strength. Sometimes it's quick, an hour or two of labour and the baby comes. Sometimes it takes all day and night, and sometimes, she pauses meaningfully, sometimes there are complications. She doesn't elaborate on what those complications might be, but you've heard stories. A baby that presents wrong so it can't come out. A mother who bleeds too much and can't be stopped. A baby that's born dead. A mother who develops fever and dies days or weeks after the birth. You'll do what we tell you, Eleanor says firmly. You'll not be silly about it. You'll not scream so loud the entire village hears you. It doesn't help and it disturbs people. You'll focus on the work of birth, and you'll trust Goodwife Margot, who knows what she's doing. So you begin the practical preparation for birth. Eleanor shows you how to prepare the materials that will be needed. Clean cloths, lots of them, for the blood and other fluids of birth. She shows you what herbs to have ready. Some for stopping bleeding, some for easing pain, some for strengthening contractions if labour is slow. She makes a special tea from herbs that she says will help prepare your body for birth. You also continue the physical work of the household, understanding that staying active and strong is important for being able to labour effectively. You spin, you work in the garden. Even though you're pregnant, there's spring digging to be done. You cook, you carry water. Eleanor seems to think that all this work is good for you, and for the baby. Your appetite changes. Some foods disgust you that you normally eat. You crave salt. You're constantly thirsty. Your breasts become tender, then begin to darken around the nipples in a way that fascinated and embarrasses you. Your belly is round and hard, and you can sometimes feel the baby moving inside you. A flutter at first, then increasingly strong movements that are startling and somehow miraculous. Thomas continues to come to you at night for several months, though as your belly swells it becomes increasingly awkward. Eventually Eleanor suggests that he might be more comfortable sleeping in the outer room once you're further along, and he seems relieved to do so. The relief is somewhat mutual. The physical intimacy of pregnancy is strange, and you're grateful not to navigate it. You also discover, somewhat to your surprise, that being pregnant gives you a kind of status and authority that you didn't have before. Eleanor treats you with more respect, more consideration. When you say you're tired, she adjusts your work. When you say you're hungry, food appears. The village women treat you with a mixture of sympathy and envy. Sympathy for what you're about to experience, envy perhaps of the proof that you're fertile, that you're fulfilling your purpose as a woman. One afternoon in late August, when you're heavy with pregnancy and exhausted despite still having 2 months to go, Eleanor sits down with you while you're resting by the fire and tells you about her own births. I was younger than you when I had Thomas, she says. 14, barely more than a child myself. I was terrified, and my mother was with me, and I thought I would die. The pain was so great that I couldn't believe my body could survive it. But I did. Thomas came into the world after more than a day of labour, and when I heard him cry, when I held him, I understood why women endure this. I'd have done it again, and I did. 3 more times. I lost one, my second child, a daughter, born too early and too small to live. That was worse than the pain of birth. But the others all survived. She reaches over and touches your belly, feeling the baby move. This one will be fine. I can tell by how you're carrying, the way you're strong and healthy. You'll birth this baby, and you'll be amazed at what your body can do. This small reassurance, this evidence that Eleanor has been through this and survived it, and that her children have thrived, means more to you than you expected. You're still frightened about the birth, but you're also increasingly eager to meet this person who's been growing inside you for months now. You find yourself wondering whether the baby is a boy or a girl, what it will look like, what kind of person it will become. The waiting becomes harder as you get closer to the expected due date. Your back aches constantly. Your feet are swollen. You can barely get up off a stool without help. But you're also ready as anyone can be to meet your child and to become a mother. The labour begins on a morning in late September. You wake before dawn with a strange sensation in your belly. Not quite pain, but a tightening, a clenching of your muscles. At first, you're not sure if this is it, or just another false alarm. You've had false alarms for weeks now, nights of cramping and tightening that subsided by morning. But this time is different. As the morning progresses, the tightenings become more regular, more intense. By mid-morning, you're certain that this is real labour. Eleanor examines you and announces that yes, the baby's coming, probably today, though sometimes first labours take longer. She sends Thomas away. He doesn't need to be here, she says, and brings in Goodwife Margot and another woman from the village, an older woman named Goodwife Kate, who has attended many births. They prepare the cottage, spreading clean cloths on the bed, gathering the supplies they'll need. The pain begins in earnest around midday. It's not constant. It comes in waves, as Goodwife Margot promised, waves of intense pressure and cramping that radiate from your belly, down into your legs and up into your back. Between the waves you rest, gasping for breath, trying to gather strength for the next one. "This is normal," Goodwife Margot keeps saying. "You're doing well. The baby's coming the right way." She and Eleanor and Goodwife Kate move around you with practiced efficiency. They bring you water to drink, encourage you to walk around the cottage. Movement supposedly helps. And they talk to you constantly, keeping you engaged, keeping you focused. They share stories of births they've attended, births that went well, babies that are now healthy children. They also remind you that you're strong, that your body knows what to do, that the pain will pass. As the hours progress, the pain becomes overwhelming. You feel like you're being split apart, that your body can't possibly expand enough to accommodate what's happening inside it. You cry out despite Eleanor's earlier instruction not to, and she doesn't reprimand you, just brings cool water and wipes your face. "It's time to push," Goodwife Margot announces as evening falls. "You've been in labour for more than 12 hours now, and you're exhausted. But the most intense part is supposedly coming. When you feel the next wave, push with all your strength. Push as if you're trying to push the baby out of your belly. You push, and it feels like your entire body is working toward expelling something that seems impossibly large. The pain is indescribable, almost unbearable. You push again, and then again. Goodwife Margot is saying something about the baby's head appearing, encouraging you to keep pushing. The next wave brings an intense burning sensation as your body stretches around the baby's head. "Just a bit more," Goodwife Margot urges. "The head is crowning. Push when the next wave comes." You push again, a desperate push fueled by animal instinct and pain, and the overwhelming need for this to be over. There's a sudden sensation of release, and suddenly the pressure that's been building inside you for months is releasing, and Goodwife Margot is pulling, supporting something, and then she's saying, "It's a girl, a beautiful girl." There's a moment of silence, and then, the most miraculous sound you've ever heard, your daughter cries. A thin, wailing cry that sounds angry and confused and alive. The baby is placed on your belly, wet and slippery and somehow immediately perfect, and you look at this small person that has just come out of your body, and you understand, with a sudden clarity, why Eleanor was willing to do this 4 times. "She's perfect," Eleanor says, tears in her eyes. "Look at her. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a full head of dark hair. She's perfect." But the birth isn't over yet. Goodwife Margot is still working, and after a few minutes there's another strong contraction, and she tells you to push again. You push, confused, and the placenta comes out. The organ that's been nourishing your baby, a mass of tissue that looks disturbing, but that Goodwife Margot treats with respect, acknowledging its importance to the process. "Excellent," Goodwife Margot says. "A good healthy birth. Mother and baby both healthy. Well done." Eleanor takes the baby, cleans her off with warm water and wraps her in clean cloth. The women examine her carefully, checking her over, and then Eleanor brings her back to you and guides her to your breast. Instinctively the baby knows what to do. She latches on, and you feel a strange sensation of relief and rightness. Your body is exhausted, battered, sore in places you didn't know could be sore. You're bleeding, though Goodwife Margot says this is normal, and she's packed cloth between your legs to manage it. You smell blood and sweat and other bodily fluids, but none of that matters because you're looking at your daughter, and she's alive, and she's healthy, and she's yours. "What will you name her?" Eleanor asks. You think about your mother, about the women who raised you, about this new person who has just entered the world. "Margaret," you say. "I'll call her Margaret, after my mother's mother." Eleanor nods approvingly. "Margaret. A good name, a biblical name. She'll be a good woman." Outside, the sun is setting on what has been the most intense day of your life. Tomorrow you'll be a mother in full, responsible for keeping this small person alive. But tonight, in this moment, you can simply be awed by what your body has done, grateful to be alive, grateful that your daughter is alive and healthy. The weeks after Margaret's birth are a blur of sleeplessness, constant feeding, endless amounts of laundry, and a kind of exhaustion that you didn't know was possible. Your body aches. The bleeding continues for weeks. Your breasts are tender and sometimes cracked from nursing. You find yourself weeping at random moments, for no apparent reason other than emotional overwhelm. Eleanor is both sympathetic and matter-of-fact about all of this. "This is what happens after birth," she says, when you dissolve into tears over a spilled pot of pottage. "Your body is healing, your mind is adjusting. It will pass. For now, you rest as much as you can, and you let your body recover." She and Goodwife Margot both tell you to stay mostly inside for the first month. This is traditional postpartum rest, meant to allow your body to heal without the stress of work. You're still responsible for basic care of Margaret, nursing her constantly, changing her cloth diapers, rocking her when she cries. You sleep when she sleeps, and wake when she wakes, which means you're getting fractured sleep that never feels adequate. Thomas comes to see Margaret, examines her with something like wonder, and then seems to retreat into his normal life, working in the fields and coming home in the evening, expecting the household to continue functioning normally. Eleanor handles much of the work that you normally do, cooking and managing the household while you focus entirely on the baby. The early days are frightening. Margaret cries a lot and you can't always figure out what she needs. Is she hungry? Wet? Uncomfortable? Sick? There are a few moments when the crying is so intense and you're so exhausted that you feel a flash of something dark, a sense that you can't do this, that you don't know how to keep this baby alive, that you're failing her. But Eleanor is there at these moments, showing you how to hold her differently, how to soothe her, how to identify what she needs. She'll develop a rhythm, Eleanor assures you. Right now she's adjusting to being outside the womb. Everything is new and strange to her, but soon she'll establish patterns, and you'll know when she needs to eat and when she needs to sleep, and the crying will ease. After about a month, you begin to venture outside again. You've been attending church since the birth wasn't considered a defilement. The church has various rules about women being unclean after childbirth, but Eleanor explained that those rules vary by locale and priest, and your priest seems relatively relaxed about it. You bring Margaret, swaddled in cloth, and the village women coo over her, commenting on her beauty and her size and her alertness. Several women ask you when you'll have your next child, as though Margaret is only the beginning of a long series of pregnancies and births. The idea is terrifying. You've just recovered from your first pregnancy and birth, and now you're being asked to think about doing it again. But you understand that this is indeed your future. If you're fertile, if God wills it, there will be another baby, and then another, possibly many more. You also discover that nursing Margaret extends the period before your body returns to full fertility. Some women menstruate again within a few months of birth. Others go a year or more without their monthly blood, as long as they're actively nursing. Knowing this makes you feel marginally less desperate about the inevitable return of pregnancy. Margaret grows with surprising speed. Within 2 months she's noticeably larger, more aware, beginning to follow people with her eyes, and to smile what might be responsive smiles, or might just be gas. Your bond with her deepens daily. You find yourself thinking about her constantly, worrying about whether she's warm enough, well-fed enough, happy. The love you feel for this small person who has come from your body is fierce and overwhelming. By 3 months postpartum, you're back to normal work. You're spinning again, though you have to nurse Margaret frequently and adjust your work around her schedule. You're helping Eleanor with cooking and household management. You're tending the garden plot as spring transitions into summer. Life is beginning to establish a new normal, where Margaret is incorporated into your daily rhythms rather than dominating them entirely. One evening, Thomas comes to you in a way that suggests he's returning to his marital rights. You're still sensitive from the birth, it's only been 4 months, and the experience is uncomfortable. But you understand that this is expected, that married women are supposed to resume sexual relations after a reasonable recovery period. If another pregnancy comes, so be it. This is the life you're living now. Eleanor watches your adjustment to motherhood with what seems like approval. She brings you herbs that she says will help your body regain strength. She teaches you how to prepare soft foods for Margaret for when she's older and ready to eat something other than milk. She shows you the importance of cleanliness to prevent illness. She treats you with increasing respect, acknowledging that you've now fulfilled the most important requirement of a wife. You've borne a healthy child. In your quieter moments, you think about your mother. You wonder if she'd be proud of you, if she'd marvel at how you've managed the birth and the early motherhood. You wish she could meet Margaret, could see that you've done well, but you also understand that the path of your life has taken you away from her, probably permanently. You might see her occasionally if you travel back to your birth village, but your life is here now, with Thomas and Eleanor and Margaret. Time passes in the rhythm of seasons and the cycle of women's work. Margaret grows from an infant into a toddler who can sit up, then crawl, then walk. She begins to eat bread soaked in pottage, then solid foods. She learns to talk, though her first words are a chaos of sounds that Eleanor and you carefully teach her how to pronounce correctly. A year after Margaret's birth, you realise you're pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy is easier. You know what to expect. Your body knows what to do. You're also more efficient about managing your work around the pregnancy. By your second child, bearing babies feels less like a miraculous shock and more like a normal part of life, something you do regularly like spinning or cooking. Your second child is a boy whom you name Robert after Thomas's father. He's born more quickly than Margaret was, just a few hours of labour, and his arrival is greeted with less drama. Thomas is pleased to have a son, someone to carry on his name and his work. Margaret, now nearly 2 years old, is bewildered by the presence of another baby and has to be taught not to squeeze him too tightly or poke him too aggressively. The years begin to blur together. Pregnancy, birth, nursing, the endless work of caring for small children alongside all the other household tasks. By the time you're in your 20s, you've borne 4 children: Margaret, Robert, a daughter you name Catherine, and another son, William. 2 of them survived into childhood. One died as an infant from a wasting sickness that goodwife Margot couldn't prevent, and another was stillborn after a quick labour that gave no warning that anything was wrong. Childbirth becomes a familiar rhythm. Pregnancy becomes normal. The pain and fear diminish, though they never disappear entirely. You develop a kind of competence around birth and recovery. You know how to manage the pain. You know what herbs help. You know what to expect from your own body. This knowledge, accumulated through experience, gives you a kind of confidence that younger, first-time mothers lack. Eleanor grows older and gradually cedes more of the household management to you. Her hands become gnarled with arthritis, making fine work difficult. She still supervises, still makes the major decisions, but more and more the day-to-day work falls to you. You manage the garden, plan the meals, maintain the cloth production, tend to the animals, and coordinate the household work. Thomas's father dies during the winter of your 5th year of marriage, and Thomas inherits the land and the responsibilities that come with it. Your household becomes more prosperous. There's slightly more food, better quality clothing, more flexibility in how you manage resources. Thomas works hard and his productivity pays off in modest wealth by peasant standards. Eleanor gradually retreats from her active role, spending more time by the fire, tending to her herbs, and providing advice when requested. The village itself is changing too, though the changes are subtle. There's a new mill being built, more efficient than the old one. The lord is demanding more work services from peasants, though he's also providing better protection. In recent years, there have been raids by soldiers from neighbouring lands, and the lord has actually mobilised forces to defend the village. There are rumours of a larger war happening farther away, something about English and French fighting over succession to thrones. But it feels distant and unreal compared to the immediate realities of village life. Your children grow and begin to contribute to the household work. Margaret, now older, learns to spin and to help with cooking. Robert, at 7, is beginning to work with his father, learning the skills of farming. Catherine, at 4, is already assigned simple tasks, gathering eggs, helping to carry water, learning the rhythms of household work. William, the youngest at 2, still mostly plays, though even at his young age he's beginning to be assigned small responsibilities. You notice that your body is changing from constant pregnancy and nursing. Your breasts are no longer as full as they once were. Your figure is rounder in some places and slacker in others. Your hands are rough and scarred from work. You're developing some grey in your hair, though you're not yet 30. The constant physical labour of medieval life has marked you in visible ways. But you're also aware that you've achieved something like respect in the village. People come to you with questions about herb remedies, about childbirth, about household management. When you went to your birth village a year ago to visit your mother, you were treated with deference by the younger women who recognised that you had more experience, more knowledge, more authority than they did. Your mother looked at you with pride, you thought, though she also seemed sad about how much her grandchildren didn't know her. Thomas treats you with something like partnership, even though he still maintains the formal authority of a husband. You handle the household, he handles the fields and external business. You consult each other on major decisions. The marriage is not passionate. Passion is not something that medieval peasants expect from marriage, but it's functional and increasingly comfortable. You've settled into your life. This is who you are now, a wife, a mother of 4 living children, and 2 dead ones whose names you still remember, a woman of some authority in your household and village, a keeper of women's knowledge about birth and healing. The frightened girl who left her mother's house to marry a stranger is gone. In her place is a woman who knows how to survive. If you could read, if you were educated beyond the oral tradition of your village, your understanding of the world would be vastly different. But reading is not a skill available to peasant girls, no matter how intelligent they are. The only women who learn to read and write are those who enter convents, or girls from aristocratic families, or occasionally a merchant's daughter whose father believes literacy will help the family business. The books that exist in medieval Europe, and there aren't many, are mostly in Latin, the language of the church and the educated. Father Cuthbert has a few books in the church: a Bible, a lectionary, a book of saints' lives. These are precious objects, carefully protected, handled reverently. The Bible is in Latin, incomprehensible to most people. Father Cuthbert reads selected passages aloud in church, translating roughly into the local language that people actually speak. If you could read, you might know about Christine de Pizan, a woman who lived 200 years ago and became a writer. She was one of the first women in Europe to support herself through her writing, authoring books about women, about virtue, about governance. She wrote a book called The Book of the City of Ladies, in which she imagined a city inhabited entirely by famous women, women of learning, women of virtue, women of courage. It was her way of refuting the misogynist ideas that were common in medieval literature. But you don't know about Christine de Pizan. You don't know that women can write books. The idea is so foreign to your understanding that you wouldn't even know what to call it if someone described it to you. You also don't know about Hildegard of Bingen, a woman whose life spanned the 1100s, and who was so brilliant and prolific in her writing that she became one of the most influential figures of her time. Hildegard wrote about theology, about music, about medicine. She created illuminated manuscripts. She corresponded with popes and kings. She ran a convent and was influential far beyond her cloister. But Hildegard was educated, given to a convent as a child, taught Latin and the skills of a scholar. This path was available only to a tiny fraction of women, and it required circumstances that your family couldn't provide. What you do know is the oral literature of your village, the stories told by travellers, the ballads sung by wandering musicians, the tales that older people tell about events before you were born. You know bits of biblical stories that Father Cuthbert has explained. You know some folklore and superstition, beliefs about what causes illness, how to predict the future, how to ensure good harvests or fertility. You know the practical knowledge necessary to survive, how to grow food, how to prepare it, how to make cloth, how to birth babies, how to heal common ailments. This knowledge is real and valuable, but it's entirely different from the knowledge that educated people possess. You don't understand mathematics beyond practical counting and measuring. You don't understand the mechanics of the universe beyond what you can see and feel. You don't know that the Earth orbits the Sun. You believe that the Sun moves across the sky and that the Earth is the centre of creation. You don't understand why some people get sick while others stay healthy. You attribute it to divine will or bad luck or sometimes to witchcraft. This is not stupidity on your part. Medieval educated people also had false understandings of how the world worked. The difference is that they had a framework of written knowledge, of classical texts, of accumulated scholarship. You have oral tradition and immediate experience. If you could read and were educated, you might be fascinated by the questions that medieval scholars argued about. Questions of theology, of natural philosophy, of the nature of being. You might enjoy the complex logic and argumentation that educated people engaged in. You might value the beauty of illuminated manuscripts, the artistry of scribe work, the elegance of Latin language. But these things are not available to you. Your world is smaller, more immediate, more practical. Your learning happens through watching and doing, through listening to stories, through accumulated experience. It's a different kind of knowledge, and it's not inferior, it's just different and adapted to the life you're living. Sometimes, when a travelling scholar or a merchant educated beyond the usual level comes through the village, you might overhear conversations about faraway places, about events happening in the wider world, about ideas and concepts that feel abstract and irrelevant to your daily life. These conversations remind you that there's a larger world beyond your village, a world of books and learning and educated people. But that world is fundamentally inaccessible to you. You don't resent this exactly. Resentment would require imagining a different possibility, and your imagination is bounded by your experience. You accept that there are differences in knowledge and status between people, just as you accept that there are differences in wealth and power. This is simply how the world is structured. But if someone were to teach you to read, if that were somehow possible, you suspect you would be hungry for books, hungry for the knowledge that written words contain. You have a sharp mind, a good memory, the ability to understand complex practical systems. These skills, applied to intellectual work, might have developed into something formidable. But your world has no space for such development, and you'll never know what you might have become if you'd been given the chance to read. By the time you're in your 40s, your role in the village has shifted again. You're no longer the young wife learning from your mother-in-law. Eleanor has become elderly and increasingly frail, and your household now depends on you to manage its operation. You have teenagers who can contribute real labour, and a youngest child still young enough to require constant supervision. Your children are beginning to be integrated into the village's social structures. Margaret, now in her 20s, is betrothed to a young man from a neighbouring village. The betrothal was arranged by you and Thomas in consultation with the boy's father. Margaret will follow the same path you did, leaving her home, learning a new household's ways, eventually bearing children. You've given her as much training as you can, teaching her to spin, to cook, to manage all the tasks of a household. You've also taught her what you learned from your mother and from Eleanor, the knowledge of herbs, of birth, of women's bodies. When Margaret leaves your household, she'll carry that knowledge with her. Robert is becoming a young man, and Thomas is training him to eventually take over the farming operation. William will probably work for the Lord or become apprenticed to a trade in the larger town nearby. Catherine, your middle daughter, is at the age where marriage negotiations might begin. She's beautiful in a way that you weren't, and Thomas is hoping to marry her up, to secure a match with a family of better standing than yours. It's a delicate negotiation, as always, balancing what you can afford to give as a dowry against what kind of match you can secure. Your authority in the household is now nearly complete. Thomas still maintains the formal authority of a husband, but increasingly he defers to your judgment on household matters. You decide what crops to plant in the garden, how the grain should be stored, when animals should be slaughtered, how resources should be allocated. Your word carries weight with your children, and they respect you in a way they might not respect Thomas. In the village too, your authority has grown. Goodwife Margot, the midwife, is becoming elderly, and younger women are beginning to come to you with questions about childbirth and remedies. You've attended enough births over the past 25 years that you know as much as Goodwife Margot. When she dies, and she will die soon, you suspect, she's already in her 70s, you might become the village midwife, the woman others call when babies are being born. This would be a significant shift in status and responsibility. Midwives are respected, sometimes feared. They hold knowledge that's literally vital, the knowledge of how to keep mothers and babies alive during birth. They're also somewhat suspect. People sometimes blame midwives if births go wrong, if babies are stillborn or mothers die. But the position also brings certain authority and a degree of independence that you wouldn't have otherwise. You've also noticed as you've aged that your beauty, which was never remarkable, has faded. Your breasts are slack, your skin is weathered, your body shows all the marks of your hard life and multiple pregnancies. This would have troubled you when you were younger, and more concerned with attracting male attention. Now it's actually freeing. Men no longer regard you with sexual interest, and you no longer have to perform the kind of modest femininity that younger women maintain. You can speak more directly, move more freely, occupy space without worrying about male attention. Thomas is aging too. His hair is grey, his movements are stiffer. The physical labour of farming is beginning to become harder for him. You notice that he tires more easily, that he sometimes winces with pain, though he doesn't complain. There's a partnership that's developed between you over 25 years, a kind of shorthand understanding, a way of working together that doesn't require explanation. The love between you is not the passionate kind. It's built on routine and long familiarity and mutual respect. When he's sick, you tend to him with efficiency and care. When you're ill, he ensures that the household work gets done. You sleep side by side most nights, though the sexual element of the marriage has largely faded. Pregnancies have become less frequent in your 40s, perhaps because you're less fertile, perhaps because Thomas is less interested in the marriage act now that you're not young. You've also settled into a kind of comfortable understanding of mortality. You've seen people die, from illness, from age, from accident, from complications of birth. You've lost 2 of your own children, and though the grief from those losses never entirely fades, you've made peace with them. You understand that life is fragile, that survival to old age is not guaranteed, that you should be grateful for the years you've had. Your greatest fear now is becoming a burden, becoming too ill or infirm to contribute to the household, becoming someone who must be cared for rather than someone who does the caring. You hope that if you live long enough you'll have grandchildren, and that seeing them might make the final years of life meaningful in a way that you can't fully articulate.
Hello.
The girl who left her mother's house as a frightened teenager is long gone. In her place is a woman of authority, knowledge and hard-won wisdom, a woman whom younger women come to for advice, whom her children respect, whom her village recognises as someone essential to its functioning. You're in your 60s now, and your life has taken on a quality of both urgency and peace. You move slower, your joints ache, and some days you wake up wondering how long your body will continue to function. But you've been given the gift of longevity. Not everyone in medieval villages reaches this age. Childbirth, illness, accident, and the constant wear of physical labour claim the lives of many before they reach middle age. You're one of the survivors. Goodwife Margot died 2 years ago, and as you'd expected, you've become the village midwife. You've attended more than 50 births in the past 2 years, and though some have been difficult, most have resulted in healthy babies and living mothers. Your reputation has grown. People come from neighbouring villages sometimes, seeking you out because they've heard you're good with births, because you know the herbs that ease pain, because you know when to call in outside help and when complications can be managed through your own knowledge. The work is hard on your ageing body. You're sometimes called out in the middle of the night when a woman goes into labour and you don't sleep as well as you used to. The long hours of attending a difficult birth leave you exhausted, but the work is also gratifying in a way that the endless household tasks never were. You're essential. When a woman is in labour, all her hopes and fears and the hopes of her family rest on your shoulders. You carry that responsibility seriously. You've also become the keeper of women's knowledge in a more formal sense. Younger women, girls preparing for marriage and childbirth, come to you for information and instruction. You teach them how to recognise pregnancy, how to prepare for birth, how to recover afterward. You teach them the herbs that help with various women's ailments. You teach them how to manage menstruation, how to predict fertility, how to space children if they want to. This last is delicate knowledge, the kind that the church would disapprove of if they knew you were teaching it. But you teach it anyway, because you know that women sometimes need to limit pregnancy. A woman who's bearing a child every year until she dies is a woman who will probably die in childbirth before she reaches 50. Spacing children preserves mothers' lives. You don't teach this publicly. It's knowledge passed woman to woman in private conversation, with the understanding that it shouldn't be discussed with men or priests. Thomas died last winter, sudden and unexpected, from what might have been a seizure or a stroke. He collapsed while working in the field, and by the time someone brought him home, he was already past help. You weren't there, you were attending a birth in the next village. By the time you returned, he was dead. You grieved more than you expected to, given that the love between you wasn't passionate. But 25 years of shared life leaves an absence when the other person is suddenly gone. Your children are grown now. Margaret has borne 2 children and is managing a household in the next village. Robert has inherited the farm and is doing reasonably well, managing the land competently. Catherine married into a slightly wealthier family, which was a good match. William works for a merchant in the larger town. None of them need you for survival, but they all recognise your value as the family matriarch, the keeper of family knowledge and history. You have 7 grandchildren now, ranging in age from a few months to nearly 10 years. They're a constant delight and a constant source of worry. You've kept several of them through long recoveries from illnesses that could have killed them. You've taught them the village knowledge, how to identify plants, how to make herbal remedies, how plants are used in cooking and medicine. Your youngest grandchild, a girl of 4, follows you around constantly, and you're carefully training her as your successor in the knowledge of healing. Living past 60 has given you a perspective that younger people don't have. You've seen the seasons cycle many times. You've seen good years and bad years, years of plenty and years of hunger. You've seen people born, grow up, age, and die. You understand the patterns of life in a way that only comes from living through many iterations of them. You've also earned the right to speak more freely than you could when you were younger. If you have an opinion about how the village should be run, or about an injustice you perceive, or about someone behaving badly, people listen. Not because they necessarily agree with you, but because you've earned the right to an opinion through decades of competence and care. The other old women in the village, there aren't many of you, have become your companions in a way that younger women never could be. You share memories that no one else has. You make jokes that are rooted in events decades in the past. You understand each other's aches and pains and the small indignities of aging bodies without having to explain them. You've become a kind of council of elders, and the village consults you on important matters. But you also know that your time is limited. Your body is wearing out. You have good days and bad days, and the bad days are becoming more frequent. You don't know how many more years you have, but you know the number is finite. You're at peace with this mostly. You've lived a long life. You've accomplished what you were meant to accomplish. You've kept a household running. You've born and raised children. You've brought new lives into the world. You've accumulated knowledge and passed it on. You've done the work that women do. Your granddaughter Emma, named after a distant relation, your great-aunt who you barely remember, sits at your feet as you prepare herbs by the fire. She's 10 years old enough to begin serious learning, and she's shown an aptitude for the knowledge that you're trying to pass on. Her mother thinks she should focus more on spinning and weaving, the skills that will make her a desirable bride. But you've convinced her to allow Emma to spend time with you, to learn the herb knowledge. This one, you say, holding up a dried plant with small purple flowers, is for headaches. You dry the flowers like this, and then you make a tea by steeping them in hot water. 3 or 4 flowers to a cup of water, drink it warm. What about this one? Emma asks, pointing to another bundle of herbs. That's for easing the pain of monthly bleeding. Women drink it as a tea, or you can make a poultice if someone has particularly bad cramping. You bind the dried herb with warm cloth against the belly. You're teaching her practical knowledge, the kind that keeps people alive and functioning. This knowledge is valued within women's circles, though men would consider it unimportant or even inappropriate to discuss. Medieval medicine is a mix of practical observation and superstition, of remedies that actually work and remedies that are pure magic. You've learned to distinguish between them, though you don't entirely discount the superstition. Sometimes belief in a remedy seems to help as much as the remedy itself. "Will I be a midwife like you?" Emma asks. You could be, you say. You have good hands and a calm temperament. Those are the things a midwife needs. But you might also marry a man who takes you to a place far away, and you might not be able to attend births in your new village, or you might have so many children of your own that you don't have time for other women's births. The future is not certain. But you had children and you're a midwife, Emma points out. I did. But I also didn't have a choice. I did both because I had to. Your generation might have more options. I don't know. You don't entirely believe this, actually. The path of a medieval woman seems fixed by circumstances of birth and family arrangement. But you want Emma to believe that her life might be different, that she might have some agency in how it unfolds. You continue the lesson, showing her how to identify plants that are useful versus plants that are dangerous. There are plants that will poison someone, and you've learned to identify them all. You've also learned what those plants can be used for. In small controlled doses, some of them can actually be helpful, but used carelessly or maliciously, they're deadly. You don't teach Emma about poisonous plants in detail, but you make sure she can identify the most dangerous ones and avoid them. By late afternoon, your back is aching from the work of sitting, and you send Emma away to help her mother with the cooking. You rest by the fire, watching the flames, and think about what you're trying to accomplish with this teaching. You're preparing Emma to be a woman who can survive and help others survive. The knowledge you're passing on is practical and immediately useful, but it's also a form of power. The power to heal, to manage crises, to understand the human body in ways that most men don't. A few weeks later, Emma's mother comes to you with her young son, who's running a fever and can't be roused from sleep. You examine him carefully, checking his skin for the heat of fever, looking at the whites of his eyes, feeling his belly for swelling that might indicate illness. You ask about his bowels, about any rash, about when the fever started. I'm concerned, you tell Emma's mother, but not terrified. Fevers often break on their own. What we need to do is keep him cool and hydrated. Give him water constantly, even if he doesn't ask for it. I'll make you a tea of willow bark. It should help with the fever. If he's still this feverish in 3 days, you need to come back to me. You prepare the willow bark tea, explaining carefully how much to give, how often. You also give her fresh linen cloths that she can wet with cool water and place on his forehead and wrists, where the big veins are close to the skin. 3 days later, the boy's fever has broken, and he's recovering. His mother comes to thank you profusely, bringing you a gift of fresh cheese and eggs. Emma looks at you with something like awe. You've helped save her brother's life. This is the true measure of your power as an old woman and a healer. It's not the formal power that men have. You don't control land or money or people's lives in any official way, but you have the power to preserve life, to ease suffering, to guide women through the most dangerous experiences of their lives. You have knowledge that's essential, that can't be replicated by just anyone. This knowledge has made you necessary, and necessity creates a kind of power that's real, even if it's not formally recognized. You're aware that you're getting near the end of your life. Your body is frail now, and even simple tasks are exhausting, but you're trying to pour as much knowledge into Emma as possible before you die, trying to ensure that the knowledge continues even after you're gone. This is your legacy, not money or property, which you don't have in any substantial amount, but knowledge, the accumulated understanding of how to keep people alive and well. Winter comes, and you stay indoors more, your old bones aching in the cold. You spend hours sitting by the fire, working slowly on fine mending tasks that don't require intense concentration. Young women bring you problems to solve, questions about their health, their pregnancies, their fears. You answer as best you can, drawing on decades of experience. You think often about the changes you've witnessed in your lifetime. The village itself hasn't changed dramatically. There are still the same number of families, still the same basic structures of lord and peasants, still the same cycle of agricultural seasons. But you've seen small changes. The mill has become more efficient. The lord has built a small stone chapel that's closer to the village than the old church. There's a new road that makes it easier for merchants to pass through, which means more news and goods from farther away. You've also seen human changes. When you were young, literacy seemed like something that would always be rare, something only for monks and priests. But in your old age, you've noticed a few more people who can read and write. A merchant's son, a blacksmith's clever daughter who learned from a travelling scholar. Knowledge is still guarded and rare, but it's spreading slowly. The larger world has also changed in ways you only vaguely understand. There have been wars, English fighting, French, nobles fighting each other, battles and deaths that happened far away but somehow affected your village through increased taxes and demands for military service. There's been disease, though thank God not the terrible plague that killed so many people in the lands that the travelling merchants come from. There's been slow changes in the church, reforms and arguments about how things should be done. None of this has touched your daily life directly, but you're aware that you live in a world that's larger than your village, and that world is changing in ways that you'll never fully understand. You've also come to terms with the facts of your life in ways you couldn't when you were younger. You were not educated. You never left your village for more than a few days. You never had the kind of intellectual stimulation that comes from reading or discussing philosophy. You never had the kind of romantic love that the travelling singers sing about. You never had the kind of freedom that men have to move through the world without constant vigilance or fear or obligation to others. But you were also never entirely without agency. You made decisions about your household. You influenced your children's lives. You developed skills and knowledge that made you necessary to your community. You brought new lives into the world. You eased suffering. You helped people survive. In the small sphere available to you, you exercised real power. You wonder sometimes what your life might have been if you'd had different circumstances. If you'd been born to a wealthy merchant family, you might have had the chance to learn to read. If you'd been born to nobility, you would have had more freedom and also less responsibility for the constant work of survival. If you'd been born as a boy, your entire life would have been different. More freedom, more power, fewer physical dangers, but also different responsibilities and different kinds of constraints. But these are idle wonderings. You were born as you were to a peasant family as a girl in a medieval village. You became what your circumstances created, a woman of hard work, practical knowledge, and the quiet authority that comes from being essential to people's survival. In January, during a particularly harsh cold snap, Goodwife Kate, one of your oldest friends, dies in her sleep. She was older than you, in her 70s, and her body was worn out from decades of work. You grieve for her. She's been a companion since your youth, but you also understand that death at her age is a mercy. Pain and decline are the alternative to death, and she's escaped both. You're not afraid of death anymore. You've accepted it as inevitable, and you're more curious about what comes after than frightened of the dying itself. The church teaches that you'll be judged for your sins and either go to heaven or hell. You've tried to be a good woman, to help people, to be honest and hard-working. You're not sure if that's enough. No one really is, but you've done the best you could with the life you were given. One evening, you call Emma to you. You're not well, and you suspect you might not have another winter ahead of you. You give her the bundle of your special herbs, the ones you've kept through all your years. You tell her which ones are for what purpose. You tell her about the births you remember, the women you've helped, the knowledge you've accumulated. When women come to you with their troubles, you tell her, listen carefully. Listen to what they're not saying as much as what they are saying. Feel their pulse. Look at their colour. Trust your hands and your instincts. And remember that you're part of a long line of women who have done this work. Your mother, my mother, women stretching back farther than we can count. The knowledge passes from woman to woman, and you're receiving it now. Emma nods, understanding the importance of this moment. She's becoming the keeper of knowledge, the one who will pass it on to the next generation of women. You've done what you were meant to do. Now it's time to rest. By February, your body is failing. You spend most of your time in bed or sitting by the fire, too weak for anything beyond the simplest tasks. Your daughter Margaret has come to stay with you, along with her youngest child. Robert brings you broth and sits with you in the evenings. Emma visits every day, and you take pleasure in knowing that the knowledge you're passing on will continue. You're having trouble remembering things. Sometimes you mix up your children's names, or you think it's a year when it's actually 15 years later. Sometimes you're not sure where you are or what year it is, but in your clear moments you have a kind of peace about the life you've lived. You think about your mother, who's been dead these many years. You wonder if she'd be proud of how you managed, if she'd approve of the woman you became. You think about Thomas, and about the partnership you built with him over so many years. You think about your children, each one distinct and separate, with their own lives and their own struggles. The village priest comes to give you last rites, the prayers that prepare the soul for death. You've seen him perform these for other dying people, and now it's your turn. He anoints you with holy oil, speaking Latin words that you don't understand but that you find comforting nonetheless. The ritual is familiar, and it marks you as someone whose life matters enough for the church to care about her death. One night, you wake to find that you can't feel your legs. You're not frightened. You've been expecting the body to fail in various ways. You call Margaret and she comes and sits beside you, holding your hand. You tell her that you can't feel your legs, and she just nods and continues to sit with you. "I'm not afraid," you tell her. "I've lived long enough. I've done my work. I'm ready." "I know," she says. "You've been ready for a while." You drift in and out of sleep. Sometimes you're aware of people around you. Margaret, Robert, Emma. Sometimes you're back in your mother's cottage, a girl again. Sometimes you're in the church being married. Sometimes you're in labour, experiencing the pain and fear of birth. Sometimes you're very old, as you are now, and aware that the end is coming. On the third day, as evening falls, your breathing becomes very shallow. Margaret and Robert are both there, and Emma has come to sit with you one last time. You look at your granddaughter and try to speak, but you're not sure if any words actually come out. You hope she understands what you're trying to tell her, that the knowledge matters, that she's important, that women's work is important even though the world doesn't always recognise it. The pain in your chest intensifies and then suddenly it eases. Your breathing slows, and then it stops. You've died the way most medieval women do, of an aging body wearing out, surrounded by family, in a bed instead of in a field or forest. You're given more dignity in death than many people receive, because you've earned respect through your life. Your body will be washed and wrapped in a burial cloth. You'll be buried in the churchyard in a grave next to others you've known. The priest will say words over you. The village will acknowledge your death. But your real legacy isn't in the grave or in the prayers said over your body. It's in the knowledge that Emma carries, in the birth she'll attend using the techniques she learned from you, in the remedies she'll prepare using the herbs you taught her about. It's in the stories about you that will be told in the village. Remember when old woman healed so-and-so? Remember how she brought twins into the world even though everyone thought the mother would die? It's in the influence you had on your children, and through them, on their children. Your life was not extraordinary by the standards of history. No one will write books about you. No one will record your achievements. You'll be forgotten, as most medieval women are forgotten, by history that records the deeds of kings and men. But in your village, in your time, you mattered. You were necessary. You used the skills and knowledge available to you to help people survive and to ease suffering. You raised children who survived to adulthood and had their own children. You accumulated knowledge and passed it on. You lived as fully as the circumstances of your life allowed. This is the life of a medieval girl who grew to be a woman, not a princess, not a saint, not anyone whose name would appear in a historical record. Just a woman who did the work that women do and did it as well as she could. But as you drift now in whatever comes after death, in whatever realm awaits souls after the body releases them, imagine the lives you might have lived but didn't. These are the alternative paths that remained forever closed to you by circumstance and birth. In one life you were born to a wealthy merchant family in a town far larger than your village. Your father, recognizing your intelligence, arranged for you to learn to read and write from a private tutor. You would have spent your childhood not with spinning and cooking, but with books and learning. You would have had access to knowledge that very few women possessed. Perhaps, like Christine de Pizan in a different place and time, you might have become a writer, a woman who used your education and intelligence to create works that others read. You would have had more freedom, more independence, more of a say in whom you married. Your life would have been confined in different ways, perhaps, but also more open to possibility. In another life you were born with a spiritual gift, something that made it obvious from childhood that you belonged in a convent. Your parents, recognizing this, and also perhaps lacking resources to provide a substantial dowry, gave you to a nunnery when you were 7. You would have spent your adult life in prayer and study, away from the risks and pains of childbirth, away from the subjection to a husband's authority. You might have become abbess of your convent, wielding real power over a community of women. You might have written or preserved ancient texts, or become known for your holiness and wisdom. You would have had a very different kind of authority and power than the authority you actually possessed. In yet another life you were born to a noblewoman, a lady of a castle. Your childhood would have been different. More education, more leisure, more status. You would have worn finer clothes and eaten better food. You would have been educated in courtly ways, in music and dancing and needlework done for display rather than necessity. You would have married for political alliance rather than practical partnership. and your marriage might have been either much better or much worse than the marriage you actually experienced. Your power would have been very different. The power of birth and status and the ability to influence men who held official authority. But you would also have been more trapped, perhaps, in a different way, confined to a castle or court, used as a political pawn, your identity entirely defined by your family's position. In another version, you were born to a woman in a larger city, and as a child you showed aptitude for a trade. Perhaps you would have become a baker's daughter, apprenticed to learn the trade, eventually taking over a bakery. You would have had independence and some economic power that peasant women don't have. You would have owned your own business, made your own decisions about whom to marry and when. But this path was almost entirely unavailable to medieval women. Trades were the province of men, and women were largely excluded from formal apprenticeships and guild membership. In another life entirely, you were born to a different family in a different time and place, perhaps as a woman in ancient Rome, or in a future age where women's roles are entirely different. You might have had access to education and power and freedom that you can't even imagine from within your medieval context. You might have become a scholar or a leader, or someone whose name was recorded and remembered. But none of these other lives were available to you. The circumstances of your birth determined your path with startling finality. You were born female, to a peasant family in a medieval village in Europe. These facts about you were nearly impossible to overcome. They shaped everything. What you could learn, what work you could do, whom you could marry, what freedom you could have, what authority you could wield. This is not to say that your life was without meaning or without choices. Within the constraints of your circumstances, you made decisions. You worked hard. You accumulated knowledge. You helped people survive. You influenced your family and your community. You lived with dignity and purpose. But these accomplishments happened within very narrow boundaries that you did not create and could not escape. The medieval world was a world structured around hierarchy and fixed roles. Your role, as a woman of the peasant class, was fixed from birth. You were expected to bear children, to maintain a household, to work continuously, and to accept the authority of men over you. Within that framework, you might be intelligent or foolish, kind or harsh, competent or incompetent. But the framework itself was unchangeable. If you could speak to a girl who is alive in this moment, reading or hearing this story, you would want her to understand something that you never fully grasped. That the constraints of your life were not inevitable, that not all women throughout all times have lived as you lived. That it's possible to imagine a world where women's lives are structured differently. You would want her to value the freedom she has, to use it for purposes that matter to her, to never accept that her life is fixed and unchangeable. But she would also understand, perhaps, that in the medieval world you inhabited, you did the best you could. You used the power available to you. You helped people. You mattered. Your life had meaning. And now, as the bells of the distant church ring out in the deepening evening, as the fire in the hearth burns low and soft, as the world settles into darkness and quiet, we return to you. You, the reader, lying in your own bed, safe and warm, listening to the story of this medieval girl's life wind down like a music box slowing its final turns. Margaret is gone now, her story told, her life completed. The village where she lived has itself faded into history, probably obliterated centuries ago by war or plague, or simply the passing of time and the building of new villages on top of old ones. No archaeologist has found her cottage. No record exists with her name written down. She's been forgotten by history, as were millions of women like her. But you've been given the gift of knowing her life, of understanding what it meant to be a girl growing up in the late medieval world. You understand now that beneath the surface of history, which mostly records the deeds of kings and great men, there were countless lives like hers. There were millions of girls becoming women, bearing children, keeping households alive, accumulating knowledge, dying, and passing their knowledge on to the next generation. Their stories matter, even though they weren't recorded in chronicles or celebrated in songs. They matter because they're the stories of most of humanity. The ordinary lives that add up to civilization, that preserve knowledge, that continue the human story. As you lie in the darkness now, feel the weight of the blanket on you like the weight of time itself, protecting and surrounding you. Think of Margaret's hands, worn rough from work, moving confidently through her tasks. Think of her sitting by the fire, spinning thread into existence. Think of her in the pain of labour, bringing new life into the world. Think of her as an old woman passing knowledge to the next generation. Her life was small in the scope of history. Her world was bounded by the distance a person could walk in a day. Her knowledge was practical and oral rather than written and theoretical. But her life mattered. She mattered. And now, as sleep begins to pull at the edges of your consciousness, let yourself drift backward through time. Let the story of this medieval girl settle into your dreams. Let her world become familiar, comfortable, like a cottage warming itself by a fire. The bells ring one more time in the distance, calling the faithful to evening prayer. The fire crackles softly. The world is quiet and peaceful. Close your eyes now. Let sleep come gently. You've walked through a medieval world. You've grown up, married, borne children, aged, and approached death. You've lived as a medieval girl, understanding her work, her fears, her small triumphs. Now rest. Sleep the sleep of those who have travelled a long road and found a safe place to lay their heads.